Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wednesday. And today we're talking about sex and consent, and how to talk to your teenager about sex and consent. These are really, really important topics that are super uncomfortable to talk about with your child as a parent. It's not a conversation I think any of us look forward to having. But it's, like all of the stuff that we've been talking about, the past several weeks, these are a really important thing to talk about with our kid, or children. So I'm hoping that Yvonne is just going to teach us like how to do this and make it super easy. But I don't think it's ever going to be super easy.
Oh, man. So I keep telling Miss Davis that our talks come on the most appropriate weeks. And I kind of claim to be this like cool mom who can listen to her kids talk about anything and can talk about anything and, just kind of go with the flow. That's kind of this narrative I've created for myself. But it turns out I'm more my mother than I ever thought I was. In fact, I might be even worse than my mom was. I mentioned this before. I grew up in a very conservative, religious household that just preached abstinence. And so, for us, it was like sex was just something that is bad. And so we've kind of raised our children a little bit differently. And I have a 19-year-old son, and I told him I was going to share about it. And he's like, of course you are, but he said it was fine. And so he had a girlfriend in high school, but kind of no big deal. And, now that he's in college, his high school girlfriend, they got back together. And gosh, this week, basically in a nutshell, it was very obviously confirmed to me that my son and his girlfriend are having sex. And it was this weird transition in my head. I mean, I've raised 3 mama's boys. They always come to me. And when she was in town, they spent all the time at her family's house and just going out and doing things and, all these things. And it just it was my first real empty nest moment, I think is what was happening. I felt like I didn't really have a purpose in his life anymore. And I was so disappointed and I was mad at him. And so on Sunday night, she's only here for 8 days. I said something that I should not have said. I said, isn't she going home anytime soon? And it just kind of went from there. He's like, I can't believe you would say that. You would just want me to be depressed and in my room. You would prefer that over me being happy because you're selfish. I mean, it just kind of went there. And it was so awful. And, I cried. Even to the point that I took Monday as a mental health day. I was just a disaster, essentially. So I told him I'm going to read these text messages to you because I feel like it's really important. And I said, I'm so sorry. I'm just having a hard time with all of this. He says, Mom, I love you too, but what do you mean by this? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm 19 and I don't need to feel guilty for things that I do. I said, you're right. You shouldn't feel guilty. You're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing. He says, and keep in mind, this is a straight social worker kid. You can't put your worries, fears, and anxiety onto me forever. I have to learn things and experience them for myself. And I'm like, I know. He says, all the things that you tell other kids to do all the time is exactly what I'm doing. And it's like you've been acting like it's fine all along, but all of a sudden I have to feel guilty. I said, you're right. He goes, I think you should feel more happy that I'm actually doing the things I was supposed to be doing years ago, like going to work, going to school, driving, having a relationship, hanging out with friends, and not being depressed. I said, you're right. He says, get it together, Mom. So that was my week. And, and it was kind of funny because we kind of made up yesterday and he basically told me I told him what the presentation was about and he kind of laughed. And he's like, so wait, you're the expert? So I tell you that story because 1, I'm not the expert. I am experiencing this alongside. there's so many components about your kids dating and sex that becomes very personal for you. Like, it's like you're losing that child. I don't know if you've had that experience yet, Jenny, where you just feel like you've lost your baby. Did you have that?
Oh yeah. So I had, and I've told the story to parents before, but I never felt like I could talk about sex with my mom. I mean, that was just something my mom was, she told me, honestly, like her message to me was like, well, you should always keep your legs crossed. Literally, my mom said that to me, like, keep your legs crossed, meaning like, don't open them for boys. And like, so that just like, that's what she told me. And that taught me as a teenager, well, I can't ever talk to my mom about sex because she's not going to understand. And I absolutely did not want to have that same relationship with my daughter. Like that was really like when I knew I was having a girl that was like, and I was pregnant with her, like it was so important to me that I didn't have that relationship with my daughter. And so I've always told my daughter, you can talk to me about anything. I'm not going to judge you. You can like, always come to me. And like, I've always told her that. And then one day it was about, I guess 2.5 years ago, I think she was 16 or maybe about to be 16. She's like, Mom, I need to talk to you about sex. And I was like, oh boy. And I probably didn't model like really great parent behavior. I mean, I talked to her about it, but I was like, let me get a glass of wine first. So I got my glass of wine and girded myself. And like, yeah, we had a conversation about sex. And about her having sex with her boyfriend at the time. And yeah, it was rough. It was not pleasant. But I like swallowed my like icky feeling about it. And I'm glad that we did, because now like she's always come to me, and now that she's in college and, having different types of relationships, she still comes to me, and at times it's still uncomfortable. Like she's an adult now, it's still uncomfortable, but I'm so glad that she can come to me about advice. So I have to like, so I find myself that I have to get over myself a lot, and my own, like, because she is making choices and meeting people, like, she's got a Tinder account, and like, I just,
oh, my stomach just turned now that all this is happening. When you said that, my like stomach literally
well, and I keep having, I'm gonna be honest, I keep having to remind myself that she's of a different generation. And we've talked about social media, but like, this is like how kids, and she's not really a kid anymore, but how young adults and people meet each other now is different than when I was her age. I mean, we didn't like, we barely had email when I was her age. So it's just different. And I have to kind of constantly, like I said, get over myself, because I want her to be able to come to me for advice. And I don't want to have that relationship that I had with my mom and still have them. I'm 40, I'm about to be 48 years old. I have never had a conversation about sex with my mother.
Well, it's so funny because my mom was actually the person that I went to kind of cry about all this week. And I told her, yeah, I had to sit down with Ethan and talk about birth control and all these things with his girlfriend. And she goes, well, it couldn't have been worse than the talk you and I had. And I was like, I couldn't remember. And then she's like, shall I remind you? And I just panicked. Like in my 43-year-old self, I was like, I don't want to hear my mom talk about it. I don't want to know. I'm like, no, Mom, stop. She's like, no, I'm going to remind you what you were doing at 19. I'm like, no, Mom, just stop. Like, I felt like, oh my gosh. So then I felt like empathy for my kid of like, how awkward that must have been for me to like sit in his room with him. But I felt like it was really important. And he's, 19, he's responsible, and it's never going to be fun. And I think one of the things that I wish didn't happen growing up was that sex and dating always came with this like connotation that it was like bad. And, as parents, sometimes we go to the first, like the horrible things that come with sex, STDs, date rape, pregnancy, heartbreak, like all, like we just like front load our kids with all these horrible thoughts about what that means. And so then when they experience it and then maybe something bad doesn't happen, they're confused about why we said all those things, right? It's like, I think one of the examples that I have here is it says, lead with love, not fear. Parents need to cover risks like intimate partner violence, unplanned pregnancy, STDs, and parents for sure need to address that a romantic relationship is merely just one component of your life. But we also need to be willing to talk about the positives of like connecting with someone else and loving someone else and finding a partner maybe that you want to spend your life with. And, you know, God forbid that saying that, you know, yes, sex can be enjoyable. My mom never said that to me. It was like, you know, I have parents that have come to me asking me to talk to their teenage son because they found out that he's masturbating. And I'm like, well, that's in my older mind. I'm like, oh, that's teenage behavior that happens. And now I'm like, oh, it's all kind of coming back to me. And just like these conversations that those are things that we don't normalize and talk about, yet most teenagers are doing those things, right? Like maybe dating, having sex, or maybe your kiddo's just not quite there yet. Or maybe you don't know that they're there yet. You know, it's just, there's this whole spectrum of like, you know, what we think we know about our kids. And we've talked about this before versus like what we actually know. And so, you know, my dad has kind of always criticized me for talking too openly with my kids. And so I asked him, who taught you about sex? And he said, oh, probably some kids at school. And I said, well, looking back, do you think you got accurate information? And he's kind of like thinking, and he's like, yeah, no. I said, no, that's exactly why I have these conversations, because they're going to have the conversation. So I want to make sure that they're getting accurate information and not just something that their friend heard from someone else. And it's not my favorite thing to do, but I definitely like, I see things now that I know are super important. For instance, one of the things that I was talking to a bunch of students about yesterday is I asked them, I said, do you guys know that if you take nude photos and send them to someone else, whether it was your boyfriend that you're still together with and he's not planning on sharing them, if any of the adults on campus find out, we actually are legally mandated now to call the police, whether it was consensual, whether, you know, nobody else was supposed to know, whether you were okay with it, it doesn't matter. That's still our obligation. Most people don't know that that's what's happening right now. And so these are the things that I really want to instill in our kids for their own safety. Like for me with sex and dating, it's like safety first, right? Intimate partner violence. I've had, you know, teens who are in very toxic and abusive relationships and don't even realize that they are. I think when you're a teenager, simple things like, you know, when my partner gets jealous, it's very flattering. And that's how he shows me that he loves me, or that's how she shows me that he loves me. I have a lot of teenagers who, you know, demand passwords for phones for one another and all these behaviors that seem to be normal to them, but coming from the perspective of like safety and, you know, domestic violence and things like that, like those are red flags. And those are the things that I really want to make sure that our kids are aware of. And how do we have those conversations? I know some of you are like, we don't really talk like that, but just like, you know, wearing your seatbelt and just say no to drugs, it's like those conversations that are a requirement to have. Jenny, when you were young, did you have like an age where your mom said it was okay to start dating? Like, what did that look like in your house?
So it's funny because, you know, my mom with her, like, her keep your legs crossed conversation, they were always fine with dating. Their whole thing was, well, if you're going to go out on a date, we have to meet him first. Like he has to like come to the door and you have to introduce him to your parents. Like that was like a big thing with my parents.
Like, God forbid he honked, right?
Right. Like that was a no-no. He could not honk. But you know, I didn't date that much. You know, when I was, and I don't know, I mean, I feel like kids now actually probably go out and dates more, but when I was a teenager, that wasn't something that people did. Like if you actually like had a relationship with somebody and like you like become like they were your boyfriend, okay, maybe you would go out on dates, but you didn't like just go out on
Right.
a date with somebody random.
Mhm.
Like, you know, like that wasn't something I really did until I was in college. Um,
Yeah.
so I mean, they definitely like, you know, prom and things like that, you know, so they were fine with dating. I remember being like, my parents were always like, you know, we never talked about sex and they were not okay with sex. Then my dad once made this comment to me, and I think I was like 18, and he was like, oh, you should date somebody older. Like, and I was like, what? Because there's a 12-year age gap between my parents. And so like that for my dad, like that's like normal. He's like, oh yeah, you should date somebody like much older. And I'm like, really? Like that doesn't seem right. So my parents were always a little they were just weird about it.
Yeah, that's like telling Hannah to go get herself a 35-year-old boyfriend. Like times are different. And I think that's important to remember too, is like things are always evolving. Like I was sitting down with my son and one of his friends the other night, and I was like, can you guys just explain to me, like, what does dating look like? Because one of the boys, one of his friends had went on a date with this girl, and they had went on one date, and then she said, oh, I'm going to go hang out with my ex-boyfriend at some dinner. And he was like, that is so unacceptable. I go, but she was honest, and you're not dating. You just went out one time. Like, what does this all mean? Like, he's like, oh, no, we're talking right now. When you're talking, it's okay to be honest, but then the other person can decide that they don't want to talk to you anymore, because the next phase is going to be that we're going to be like together. And I was like, oh, okay. So right now you're talking, but you still can't hang out with anyone. Like, I was so confused. And I think that's like everybody's idea of dating is different. So that might be a good conversation with your kid. It was like, what does it mean to date? What does it mean to talk to someone? You know, what I thought was hooking up might not be that for teenagers, right? And so even the lingo, like in my sessions, I'll like clarify. I'm like, okay, wait, time out. What exactly does that mean? What does that entail? What are the expectations in those kind of relationships? And how does that work for you? Because my idea of dating is, you know, I dated my husband in high school and then we got married. Like that was pretty much my dating experience. Whereas for other people, like maybe they hang out with a lot of people. I have a few tips here. And one of the things I do want to talk about is obviously consent and something about heartbreak, which is a big deal around here when we're talking about suicidal thoughts. I know that's our topic last week, but a lot of times heartbreak and suicidal thoughts go very strongly together. So just to start, just basic tips. Never shame or tease your kids about having relationships, crushes, etc. I know for them it's one, annoying, and then it kind of crosses you automatically off the list of people that they want to be a support person about their relationship. I'm guilty as charged. I remember my son had a crush on this girl in second grade, and I teased the heck out of him. I don't know that that directly relates to why he doesn't want to tell me anything now, but that was just kind of like what we did, right? It's like we want to talk about it, and that's how we do it. But turns out it doesn't really help in having those real conversations. We are too light about it, and it's especially true for kiddos who are LGBTQ community.
I would add to that, not just tease them to their face, but a mistake I've made. We had friends over, and Hannah had told me this story about something that had happened to her between her and somebody she was interested in. I don't even remember what the story was, but I remember it being like funny. Like I thought it was funny, and I like told the story to my friend. And she was upstairs and heard me telling them and got so angry with me. It was just so upset. And so about when you like share stuff about your kids and their dating life, that make sure they're not around.
Right. Or I was glad I asked Ethan, because I'm like, somebody probably knows him, you know. I asked him if I could share. Number two, and this one is really big, and I think because I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, like it also kind of hits home, is resist the urge to minimize young love. I think when there's heartbreak, when there's, you know, these very intense feelings, I think we have this instinct to like say things like, you don't know what love really is. Do you really? You don't yet. You don't get it yet. This is just going to pass. There's more fish in the sea. And all of those comments are like that toxic positivity where we're like trying to make them feel better by invalidating what they're feeling. Relationships are real. Feelings when you're 13, 14, 15 are real. I don't know if you had crushes around that age that you remember, and I'm sure your heart was invested at that time. And so for somebody to say like, no, that really doesn't mean anything, you're not there yet, or you don't understand yet, is very hurtful and can be dangerous. Because if your kiddo is sad about a breakup and you're minimizing it, but they're in their room contemplating suicide, like those are things that we want to like make sure that we're communicating.
I totally, and I totally, I did not marry my high school sweetheart. And so I do know that like you do get past that, and like you look back and you're like, oh, that was a silly relationship. And like, thank God I got past that and I'm not with that person. I'm so happy that didn't work out. But at the same time, I do remember how intense those feelings were when I was 17 years old. I mean, they were super intense. Like,
yeah. So to have somebody say like, oh, stop, just pay attention to school. You don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Definitely, again, not going to be the person that you want to be supportive of you, right? The next one is talk about love in the context of your family's values. I think we kind of separate like those kind of things from one another. Like one's romantic, one's this. It's like relationships are relationships. So when we talk about like the love within our family, we're talking about things like respect, inclusion, empathy, all of these things. And those are things that we need to incorporate in talking about dating. And how like nobody really teaches you how to treat your partner, right? Like there's not a class that's like, okay, when you're dating, make sure you do this, this, and this. And so really like helping to build that character, because like it or not, they're going to. And like I have this thing now where it's like, I want my son to be a good boyfriend. I want him to be respectful. I want him to be kind. I want him to be nice to the parents. And sometimes those aren't, we just assume those are things that they already know. And I don't know that that's true. And so I think just talking about it in the context of like how we relate to other people, how we should, and incorporating that and how we talk about dating. This one is, you can't leave sex ed to your school district. I don't know what we have as far as, sex ed goes in, between kindergarten and 12th grade. Maybe you could speak to that more than I can, but I don't think it's very much.
Well, I can speak to it because legally we have to do it sometime in high school. And it's actually funny enough, because I think letters are going out this week to parents of seniors. We have to do it to the seniors because with the pandemic, we haven't done it because of the years of the pandemic and everything. Like they were supposed to get it their sophomore year at the end of their sophomore year, but school shut down. And like, or I can't remember, like, yeah, we just haven't done it. And so they're about to graduate and we legally have to do it. So we're going to do it. But it's very clinical. It's not talking about relationships and, it's clinical. I mean, it's sex ed. It's not, I think like, so yeah, you don't want to rely on just the school to do it because we're not going to do it in the way that maybe you want to have that conversation in. And I guess I would also say, and I go back to like my relationship with my mother and my relationship with my daughter, like I want her to be able to come to me and talk to me about relationships. Because I want to know what's going on with her and I want her to feel like she can come to me for advice. And she does. And I cherish that part of our relationship. Like I said, it's not always comfortable for me. Sometimes like she like talks about stuff and I'm like, oh God. And so it's not always comfortable, but I don't want her to ever not do that. And so if I just relied on her high school to have those conversations, like we wouldn't have that relationship.
Right. And I think of you and I as like, yeah, like we are people that would talk about stuff like that normally, but I know there's people here that maybe that's not your instinct. That's not your comfort level. Maybe you've never talked about sex or anything like that with, your family at all. And so just, being mindful that like conversations, you can kind of build up to that too. It doesn't have to, because it might be more awkward if you're just like, sit down, we're talking about sex after never mentioning the S word ever. I have a kid that was just telling me that his mom makes it like still spells sex when she says it. And I was totally laughing because he's like, 18. So just giving the space to like listen and talk about it. And Jenny, when we do sex ed here, if you want an extra 15 minutes tacked on about like real stuff, let me know. I'd love to help out. This next one is talking about how technology has changed our thoughts and perceptions about sex, and how most information that kids get about sex is from social media or from their friends. You know, in the old days, to find pornography, you would have to go to the little store that sells pornography and magazines and show your ID or whatever you had to do to get movies or whatever. And now it's just like the push of a button, and that, you know, can lead to a lot of dangerous behaviors of like misconceptions about sex. Just, you know, people thinking that that's reality and not. And those are conversations that I think are also important to have with our kids about pornography addiction. That's, you know, that's a real thing that happens with teenagers, and it's not just boys, it's boys and girls. And those are things that, you know, people aren't fully aware of. And so normalizing that, like, yeah, you know what, we were talking about sex today in the coffee talk. I know it could be uncomfortable, but I think it's important that we talk about pornography or STDs or pregnancy. But I also think it's important that we talk about love and commitment and respect and consent. You know, it's not something that, you know, my kids will say things like no means no, but that was like the extent of their knowledge about what consent means, and really kind of delving into that and talking about like, when you have a partner, whether it's a girlfriend or, you know, just like somebody that you're acquainted with, it's like, you know, these are things that we really, really need to explore with our kids, even though it's uncomfortable.
Have you seen, there's a really great short video about consent and having a cup of tea. Have you seen that?
I love that one. I wish I had it now that you say that.
You know what? I'll search for it, and when I send out the video, I will include it. Let me write myself a note. So it's this great video. It's narrated by this British guy, and it's about having a cup of tea, and it's about teaching consent, and that, you know, like if you are sitting with your friend and you ask them if they want to have a cup of tea and they say no, you don't keep trying to force the cup of tea on them. And it's like just a really great and like putting it all in perspective. And so I will find it and I will send it out, so that I think it's a great thing to watch with your kids.
It is so perfect, because it's like,
it's short, it's a little bit funny. And so it's a great thing to like, if you're like, I have no idea how to start this conversation, that mean like, hey, and like, look at this video I came across, and it's because it's like just a couple
like if someone's asleep, we don't pour tea down their throat, right?
It's really great. And so if you are stuck on how to start this conversation, it's actually a great place to start. Just watch it with your kids.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's super important. You know, there's been a few things over the years that I've come across here at school, and one of them is just, you know, when it comes to dating, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sex. I've had boys who maybe made it, you know, had a girlfriend, were holding hands, and then, you know, touched her on the butt, right? And that's like something that maybe they saw on TV, that that's what you do with your girlfriend, and they didn't ask her if it was okay. And the next thing you know, we've got two sets of parents down here, you know, somebody filing sexual assault charges and all these things that started from something that could have been prevented through education, right? Like, you know, I tell my sons all the time, like, everything that you do has to come with a question first. Like, are you okay with this? You know, people cannot consent to sex or any sexual contact if they're drinking or under the influence of drugs, like no matter what. And so it's so unfortunate that people lose, you know, their lives and their freedom because they just weren't taught that something was not okay. And I think that's like, as a parent, that's like my role, right? Is to keep my kids safe, to keep other people safe, you know, with my kids, and, you know, and to teach them all the things that I know about safety. You know, we have constantly have cases of sexual assault. And a lot of times we have cases where somebody says they got sexually assaulted, And then it come to find out like somebody told them a dirty joke and they said sexual assault. So it's like we don't even have the proper language sometimes, the proper information. And so lives get disturbed, ruined, you know, for people just having that lack of education. And I think that's something as parents, it's like our role to fill and to learn and to teach. It's like, I know none of us here want our kiddos to be harmed, to go to jail, like any of those things, but there's so many things that they probably don't know about right now that could lead them there. So it's like, I wish it makes sense, right? As a parent, that like the first thing we think about when we think about our kids dating and sex. Am I the only one? I don't know if parents want to chime in the chat, but like I go to the bad stuff first when I think about my kids dating. The heartbreak, the pregnancy, like my instant reaction for my son, like having sex with his girlfriend is like, I don't want to be a grandma yet. Like that, like, I don't want something bad to happen to him. I don't want him to get hurt. I don't want him to, and it's like, I literally can't even see the positive parts, right? I see that he's less depressed. I see that he smiles, but all I'm thinking in the back of my head is, oh my gosh, what happens if he gets broken up with? Like, is it going to be a tragedy? How is he going to recover? Like, I can't sit and relax in this relationship because I know that things happen, right? And I think that might be the nature of my work is that I get a lot of bad things that happen. I make it a practice to walk around campus because I know not everyone is experiencing bad things, but in my line of work, that's kind of what happens sometimes. And so I think it's important, but, you know, yeah, if parents want to chime in about, you know, for you, what has this experience been about? Have you had these conversations? How comfortable are you having these conversations? Jenny, I know, like for me, I will continue to have these conversations. We have younger kiddos that are strangely, when you think about them dating, will be dating like before we know it. And at what point do we start talking about these things? I don't think it's ever too early to talk about consent, right? Yeah. Like even with little kids about like, you know, you're never obligated to hug people. People are not just granted access to touch you or tickle you or all these things. And it kind of starts from there. I don't know that I did a great job on that part as a mom, like thinking back, like, did I really have those conversations with my little ones? But I know like as they've gotten older, you know, and the more kind of bad things I've seen, I'm like, okay, I want to really make sure that my kiddos are prepared. How about your little guy?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think with him, I was a lot more careful when he was little about, not like forcing him to hug, you know, random relatives that he had like never met before. Whereas my daughter, I don't think I was, because there's a 6-year age gap. I think when Nathan was younger and like a baby and like a toddler, I was much more aware of, you know, issues with that and teaching consent. I asked my husband, I'm like, have you had the sex talk with Nathan? Because I don't know, just in my mind, this made me old fashioned because I was like, oh, it'd be better if it came from dad because he's a boy. Yeah. And he's like, Paul, my poor husband, he was like, yeah, we did sorta. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, it was super awkward. I don't know how deep they went into it. You know, but Nathan has, you know, declared to us that he's asexual, and that he, you know, doesn't ever see himself having a relationship. So he's definitely, I think, a little bit immature in that. So, you know, but, you know, you see stuff in like movies and like that sort of thing. And, you know, they're exposed to it.
Yeah. Are you reading that?
Yeah. So Sylvia says it's difficult to combat ideas that are normalized among their peers. For example, jealousy, exclusively talking with only one person, can't have friends with the opposite sex. They stop spending time with friends. Totally.
Yeah. And this is so common with like dating relationships where it's like literally been cut off from their friends. They're not doing the things that they normally did. They want to appease this person so badly. And it's like, you know, having to sit down and talk with kiddos about, you know, even unconscious like power and control in a relationship. Like those are things that you just don't grow up knowing, right? Like It's not okay for somebody to demand your passwords. It's not okay for someone to ignore you because they found out that you had lunch with their friend and not that your friend and not them. Like, these are things that I hear all the time. And so really, like, this kind of takes me to my next question of, if your kids were in a relationship that looked exactly like your relationship or relationships, how would you feel?
Yeah.
I'd feel okay. No, I wouldn't.
I
I
feel
don't know.
okay, but I'm also on my second marriage, and would my children were in a relationship like my first marriage, I would not be okay.
Yeah.
So I think Sylvia, and I also use social media apps to track each other and believe it's normal. I find my friends for my daughter to track her location all the time.
Yeah, but when you have like a boyfriend and girlfriend, like, what will happen during a fight is like one of them will block the other one on Instagram and then turn off their location, and then it turns off a thing. So Sylvia, that's like a good point about, like, again, that power and control. Like, that is not normal that your boyfriend knows where you are every second of every day.
And I've learned this, you have to tread carefully as a parent in having conversations, because again, you don't want to cross that line where they feel like they can't come to you because you're like judgmental.
Yeah.
And my daughter, with her last relationship, my daughter is bisexual. And so her last relationship, she over a year with this girl. And honestly, at some points it just got really toxic, and like stuff was happening that I was like, oh, cringy. And so she would like, Hannah would talk to me, and I just have to be very calm and be like, well, yeah, that's not necessarily a good thing. But I had to really like check myself and be like, no, you can't like see this, because I didn't want to drive her away. And because I knew like she's not going to break up with her girlfriend because I said so. And I wouldn't actually want that. That's not power that I would want.
Yeah, don't tell your kid that you wish his girlfriend went home.
Yeah. Great. Good job, Yvonne.
I know. So embarrassed.
So yeah, so you have to, like, as a parent, those are hard. But again, like that's like having that relationship with your kids so that they trust you and they can come to you. That's where this is so important. When they are in those relationships that you're like, that's not really great. I had a conversation with my daughter. My daughter and I carpooled today, just this morning. And we were talking about this sort of thing because she was talking about her friend as in a relationship that she's like, I don't know about, my friend's relationship. Like they seem like really codependent and it's not really healthy and that stuff. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's hard, because you can give advice, but, she's going to have to figure that out. And we just started talking about, this TV show on Netflix, the Tinder Swindler. I don't know if you guys I haven't actually watched it, heard about it. And I told Hannah she needed to watch it. And then she's like, yeah, she's telling me, she's like, well, yeah, that guy, like he like actually like convinced these girls that he was in a relationship with them. And so that's when they were giving the money. And I'm like, well, Hannah, that's what I worry about with you, because you're very trusting and you can like, yeah, I know I am. So like, you just like,
at least she was receptive to that.
But I think those are years of like building and having conversations.
Absolutely.
And again, all those times it made me super uncomfortable. Now we're at a point that we can like have that, like, hey, like you're going out in the world and be careful because, some people aren't good.
Yeah, I think Trina has an advantage. She's a labor and delivery nurse. That's definitely going to help in being open and talking about sex with your children. Maybe they should watch a delivery video. I didn't watch one until I was like 30. I don't know that I would have dated if I had, but that's awesome that you have that kind of conversation starter, if you will. Vincent has not had the conversation yet, but anticipate it will be coming. I would love to hear how that goes, how comfortable it is. And Farbod has started talking with daughter, 15 years old, but every time she laughs and asks me not to continue. Totally normal. Again, I'm 43 and I asked my mom not to continue. So keep at it.
Yeah, I would say Farbod, just like she may not, but just keep at it, and like also like have that message of she can always come to you. Like if she's got a problem,
Yes.
she needs advice, she can come to you and you're not going to judge, and like it's going to be okay, and that you're a safe person for your child to talk to, because at some point she may, and you want to be there.
Yeah. So one of the things I kind of want to talk a little bit about is heartbreak. This is a really big one. I don't know why, for me, in my experience here at work, the impact is, I don't know that it's actually more for boys or that I'm more sensitive to it because I have boys, but a lot of that like deep heartache that maybe kind of like settles inside for me in my experience has been with teenage boys. And I think a lot of that has to do with us not normalizing that it's okay to have feelings. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to express our sadness. But what happens is we have, teenagers who get into these relationships that are very close. They're very like exclusive. They no longer hang out with their friends. Their whole life becomes one another. They're very codependent. Everything is together. They just can't even think separately. And then all of a sudden, one of them wants to end the relationship. So you think back about, I don't know if I've only had one heartache in my whole life. And I still remember feeling like I got kicked in the stomach. It was very awful and painful. And I see those things. And so I want us to be very aware. If we're not talking to our kids about dating, there is no way that they're going to let us know that they're hurting over a relationship, that they have a relationship, that something's going on. I always say you're the expert in your child, right? You know their behaviors and their patterns. But when it comes to something like this, if they have heartache over a relationship that you don't know about, that's kind of, that's worrisome, right? So we want to the fact of the matter is like, no matter how hard parents have tried, myself included, our kids biologically and naturally are going to continue to grow and evolve, and they're going to date and have sex. It's going to happen, right? So if we kind of get ahead of it and know that we are those people that they can talk to, I think that's going to be so important. They're more inclined to let us know when they need help. Heartache is, gosh, it's so challenging because, I mean, literally, no matter what you say, it's like a grief process, right? So these kiddos are going through full on grief over relationships. Sometimes they're going through trauma and grief, right? And one of the things I've always thought about when it comes to like this next generation is that they can't escape this, right? I could have gotten dumped in high school and been really sad about it. And maybe he went to another school and then I moved on. Well, now, not only did I get dumped in high school, but I can see on my social media the new beautiful girlfriend that my ex-boyfriend has, right? Those are things that we didn't have to experience, at least my older generation here, of those things of like, you can continue to contact one another. When I was in high school and had a boyfriend, if somebody wanted to contact me, they had to get through my dad on the phone first, right? They didn't have access to like text me all night long and threaten suicide and all these things that I see kiddos doing. So it is different. So we don't, and we never will fully understand the extent of like the stressors that come with dating for teenagers because we didn't live it and we haven't. And so we need to be mindful of that too, of like, I'm very adamant about my kiddos putting their phone away at nighttime, because when I talk to kids all day long about like depression and heartache and suicidal thoughts, those things are always intensified when they're alone in the room at night. And so I don't want my kids to have that at night. Like, I can't stop everything, but that's something that I've decided is like a battle that I choose for them, is to not have that. So when it comes to heartache, the things I would be looking out for, I mean, again, your kiddos, they might be primping for school more, like, have that conversation. Like, are you dating? Have you been dating? It's okay. You're not going to be in trouble, because usually the conversation goes, you need to focus on school and not be dating. Right. And no matter how many times you say that, I assure you, if they found someone to reciprocate their feelings, they're going to do it anyways. Always. I think one time in the last 7 years, I had a kiddo say, I really need to break up with my boyfriend because I don't think my parents would approve. Like literally one time in 7 years. She's like a gem, like, and so things I want people to look out for is, is your kid, maybe not hanging out with their friends anymore, dropping out of things that they used to enjoy, maybe like extracurricular activities, and this one is always like, kids spending lots of time in their room. And these are, it says parents know their children best and can determine when their son or daughter is struggling. While they may not share the details of the relationship, if you observe the following warning signs, waste no time having an open, honest conversation. Chances are, if you're witnessing change, so are other people in your child's life, you may need extra support if your teen is dropping out of hobbies, spending all their free time with their boyfriend and girlfriend. That's a hard one, because I remember being in high school and dating, and that's all I wanted to do was just hang out with my husband and just like kind of forget everything else. But again, that's like setting us up for extra heartbreak when and if that relationship ends, if that's like our entire life. Sleeping too much, showing a change in appetite, grades dropping, drastically changing their appearance. This one I've seen quite a bit, where maybe the new partner wants them to look a certain way. And I've seen people kind of change their whole look and identity to appease somebody. Those are definitely warning signs for an unhealthy relationship. Inconsistent behavior and moods. I know this is a hard one because our kids are hormonal and, moods change all the time. Angry outburst, lying and sneaking around. It says, certainly make your expectations and rules and own feelings clear. But in doing so, let your teen know that you're supportive and want the best for them. How do you balance setting boundaries and being the support person? That for me has always been, it's like, because we always think of it as like good guy, bad guy, right? Like I'm kind of more the free-spirited parent. Well, I thought I was until this week. And my husband is like laying down the law, right? So how do we have these conversations with our kiddo, but also have expectations of what we want them to be doing right now? I don't know how you've handled that, Jenny, but for me, it's a hard one because I feel like sometimes it's really difficult to be both the like open-minded mom and then the one who's like, no, you're not going to have your phone after 10 o'clock and you're not going to be alone in the room with a girl, right? Like those are mine for me in my house.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely, it's always a struggle, and it's changed as, my daughter got older, had more, probably more structure and rules when she was younger. I preferred her having, like, when she had a boyfriend or when she had a girlfriend, like over at the house, because then like I was there, I was more comfortable with that, for them to be at my house than for her to be someplace else. I did have, and this is me and my, when she had a boyfriend, I was like, don't have the door closed. Did I have that rule when she had a girlfriend? No. And honestly, it was because I knew she couldn't get pregnant. Like I all you guys, like my level of what I was worried about. I'm like, well, she can't get pregnant. So is that right or wrong? You can feel free to judge me. But yeah, so I think you have to just like what you're comfortable with. I personally I felt better if she was home. That just made me more comfortable.
That's a good point. I think it's good to have these things in your head and already discussed beforehand, because my son had never had a girl come over until this week ever. And so when I came home from work, the door was closed. And in my mind, I'm like, I would have never shut the door because my parents would have thought something. He doesn't even thinking like that. And I'm like asking my husband, like, am I being paranoid? Am I being old school? Like, do I like what's, and he kind of felt the same way, but we're like, what do we, he's 19, but what? Like, so really having those discussions and like parameters before it happens, because I didn't know what to do. I was like, oh my God, like, do I knock? Like, I feel weird in my own house. Like, it was this whole thing. And it's like, I wish I would have set those like standards beforehand, because when I was in the moment, I kind of like froze, like, oh my gosh, what do I do? But remembering that like all of these things, like any mistakes our kids make, always making sure that it's like a teachable moment. Like we have so much opportunity for them to learn through this, and we can either shut down and push them away, or we can really like accept them where they are and use this to teach them and help them grow and become adults, because that's our role, right? So just in wrapping up, making sure that we're finding those teachable moments, making sure that we're not judgmental, making sure that we stay positive, not everything about dating is horrible. Just because your kiddo gets a new partner doesn't mean they're going to like drop out of school and you're going to become a grandparent in the next 9 months. Like that's not necessarily what's going to happen. So trying to stay positive, even though this is really difficult. Participate in all areas of life, not just when you need to like come down on them, but making sure that you're building that, what was it, the emotional bank account with your kiddo, that there's positive interactions, and then you can kind of throw in some of these rules with them. And the last one is accept mistakes, not just from your kid, but from yourself. Like I accepted my mistakes this week of like not being proud. I mean, it literally came down to like, I'm gonna like, you can pay for your own phone. I'm gonna take your car. Like I was that mother. Like I'm still like embarrassed that I went there, but it was just like all this like fear and worry. But just knowing, you know what, I made a mistake. I asked him for forgiveness. I think he forgave me. He might avoid me for a while, but just knowing like I haven't done this before. And it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to experience it with all the feelings. And so just know, everyone, that like you're not alone in this. If you guys have any questions, again, I'm not an expert because I completely fell flat and failed my child this week, but I learned from it and I'm going to move forward. And, you know, I learned something for when my next two start dating or try to bring girls in their room. Like, you know, so again, I don't have all of the answers. I'm learning through this. There's a lot of growing pains right now in my house, but it's part of what we're doing. And you know, if you're worried or you have concerns about your kids' dating life or relationship or anything, like always feel free to reach out to myself, Kayla Marshall. We would love to support you through this. And sometimes we're just, you know, right beside you, not knowing all the answers, but doing our best.
Yeah. All right. So that's going to wrap us up for today. Next week, we're talking about a little bit of a lighter topic. Still, I mean, still an important topic, but not quite as heavy. So we're talking about how to raise an independent teen. After we just have the sex talk with them and then how to be independent. So everybody have a wonderful week. Enjoy your week. It's supposed to rain this weekend. I was looking at the weather. Have a great rest of your day. Okay. Bye, everyone.